Hello friends, and welcome back to this course titled as Introduction to Indian Writing in English. Friends, we have successfully completed 10 units in this course. The last text which we discussed was very interesting. The name of the text was Untouchable. Now, in this unit, Unit 11, we are going to discuss a very important and award-winning text titled as The Inheritance of Loss. The name of the text is Inheritance of Loss. It is a novel, and the name of the writer is Kiran Desai. Friends, before discussing the plot of this text, I want to discuss the outcomes which you are going to learn from this lecture. You would be able to understand the structural outline of the selected text. How the text is designed, how the text is structured, how the text creates a shape. And there are various incidents and various characters in this text. And when those characters are acting in a way, you are able to understand the level of alienation or the level of, let's say, rootlessness, which is the base of this text, the inheritance of loss. So without wasting any time, let us start discussion on the plot of the text. The novel opens on a judge and his granddaughter, Sai, sitting on the veranda of their home, Cho-O-U, while their cook makes tea and the judge's dog, Mutt, sleeps on the porch. So friends, a very homely kind of setting is visible in the beginning of the text. We see that there is a person who is a judge. He has a granddaughter whose name is Sai. In the coming of the story, you will find that Sai is not the name of one character, but there is one more character with the name Sai. We will discuss it in the coming slides. And the name of their house is Cho-O-U. They had a cook who is another character in the scene. And then we have a dog whose name is Mutt. He is a pet of the judge. A set of boys from the Gorkha National Liberation Front. Friends, this is a name which, if you watch news, you must be aware of. There was a movement which started in the northeastern region of separation from India, and Gorkha National Liberation Front was, let's say, one of the, groups which supported this idea of separation. So a set of boys from this front arrive and demanded that the judge hand over his guns, threatening them with a rifle and stealing anything of value they can find in the house. Friends, this group got this information from somewhere that judge has many guns in his house. And as these people are fighting for, let's say, liberation of their area, their region, they wanted lot of guns. So, who gave them information and who persuaded them to attack on the house of judge? We will get to know about that character in the, let's say, coming slides. But for now, you can understand that it was a very critical situation, and these people looted not only those guns but whatever valuable was available in the house of judge. The judge then sends the cook to the police station. The police returns home and accuse the cook of having a hand in the robbery. So friends, the police, rather than, let's say, finding any other person who is responsible behind this robbery, they accused the cook himself, who went there in the police station, for a hand in the robbery. They tear apart his meager hut and read letters from his son Biju. Well, friends, then police started verification. They started investigation. And during that investigation, they searched the hut of this cook. There they found some letters which are written by the son of that cook. The name of the son is Biju. So Biju wrote few letters to his father, and these letters were, let's say, taken out during investigation from police. Biju works at Gray's Papaya in the heart of Manhattan, but is asked to leave when the manager of the restaurant is instructed to do the green card check. Now friends, this character Biju, who is the son of the cook, he was, let's say, working as a cook only, but not in India. He was in America. So the place where he was working, the restaurant in which he was working, was named as Grey Papaya. But he was removed from that restaurant. He had to leave that restaurant because he do not have a green card. Green card, as all of you know, that is required to stay in America as a tourist. So he was an illegal immigrant living in America without having any documents. So he was thrown out of that restaurant. He lost his job. Biju then cycles through the series of restaurants, but the situation is often the same. So everywhere he was facing the same problem, so he was not getting job in any of the restaurants. Biju is fired from a French restaurant when customers complained about the smell of the food. So there are also few complaints about the food which Biju has cooked. The food had a smell, so he was again thrown out of another job. The narrative jumps back to Sai's arrival at the judge's home 9 years earlier at age 8. Now, from the flashback, the story again comes to the present, when the robbery took place. And then here, we come to know that this girl Sai, she came to the house of the judge when she was 9 years. Let's say when she was 8 years old. 9 years ago, she came to the house of this judge. She had left St. Augustine's convent when she had grown up with English customs, because her mother and father had recently been hit by the bus. So unfortunately, in an accident, the father and mother of this girl Sai, they were hit by a bus, and these two people were killed. So she had to immediately leave St. Augustine's convent, where she was studying before the death of her parents, where she was grown up with the English customs and English beliefs, English ways of living. And then she had to move to this judge's house. The nuns then found the address of her grandfather and returned her to him. So this judge is the grandfather of this girl Sai. So getting the address of the grandfather, she was sent to the grandfather's house, to the judge's house from those nuns. When Sai arrived, she and the judge exchanged few words, but the judge was pleased that they seemed to be accustomed to similar cultures. Friends, in this story, we will find that the judge is a person who loved English customs, English way of living, because the judge was also studied abroad in a foreign country. So the customs which he was habituate of following, this girl Sai, this little girl Sai was also habituate of following those customs because she was staying in a missionary school, residential school, where she had learnt all those customs. The judge remembers when he had left his own home at age 20, he had been accepted at Cambridge to study for the Indian Civil Service. Now the story again goes in the flashback. The judge remembers that when he was 20 years old, he was, let's say, selected into Cambridge University to study and prepare for the Indian Civil Service exam. He had also just been married to a 14-year-old wife, Nimi. At Cambridge, he was treated like an outcast and a second-class citizen and barely spoke to people. Now, friends, the time duration for which this judge lived in Cambridge, they were very, let's say, critical. Nobody liked to spoke to him. He was just treated as an outcast. People ignored him. Britishers, they ignored him in the university. Before going to Cambridge, this judge was married to a girl. The name of that girl is Nimi. And when Nimi married to this judge, she was 14 years old. So Nimi was 6 years younger to judge. Judge was 20 years old and Nimi was 14 years old. He began to find his own skin color odd and his own accent strange. He spent most of his time studying. So friends, rather than blaming others, judge started blaming himself. He thought that there is some problem in his brown color. He was an Indian and he had a brown color skin. There is some problem in the accent in which he speaks. He used to speak English in Indian accent. So, rather than making himself familiar with the people, he engaged himself in studies. The morning after Sai arrives, the cook takes her to meet her new tutor, Noni, who lives with her sister, Lola. Now there are two new characters which are introduced in the story. These new characters are Noni and Lola. Noni is the new tutor who is going to teach Sai, as you know that Sai was a girl, school girl. So Noni is going to teach her. They pass the houses of Uncle Potty, Father Booty, and Afghan Princess and Mrs. Sen, all of whom are upper class and well educated. So all these characters, these are minor characters, Uncle Potty, Father Booty, Afghan Princess, Mrs. Sen, they all used to live in the nearby localities, and all these people are upper class, well educated people. Biju's second year in America begin at an Italian restaurant, when he is once again fired because the owners believe he smells bad. Now Biju, friends, as I told you, Biju is the son of the cook and he was an illegal immigrant in America. So he again got a job in some restaurant and the people thrown him out saying that there is a very bad smell which comes from the body of Biju. He then takes a job at a Chinese restaurant delivering food on a bicycle. In a winter, it is freezing and he is fired because the food he delivers becomes too cold by the time he arrives. When this person Biju got a new job in a Chinese restaurant, from there also he was fired because he delivered cold food at a place. He used to travel through bicycle, carry the food and deliver the food, but he was late and the food became very cold. Biju returns to a basement in Harlem. Harlem, friends, is the name of the place where these illegal immigrants used to live. There are many others like Biju. So Biju used to live in a basement at that place. Biju returns to a basement in Harlem where he lives with other undocumented immigrants in destitute conditions. He then gets another job at the Queen of Tark's bakery. So friends, the new place where Biju got a job is named as Queen of Tark's bakery. So that is a bakery house. Over the years, the cook had become ashamed of judge's poor treatment of him, and he began to lie to other servants and sign to exaggerate the judge's wealth and social standing. So friends, now we again move back to the present time, and there is a cook I told you who is the father of Biju and who used to work in the house of judge. So over the years we see that this cook is ashamed of judge's poor treatment. Judge do not like to treat him in a very, let's say, positive manner. Rather than that, judge used to rebuke him. And which is why this cook began to, let's say, telling lies to other servants and to Sai also. He used to exaggerate judge's wealth, saying that judge is a very rich person and judge has a very, let's say, is a very dignified position into the society. But this was not the case. Judge was not very popular in the society as a gentleman, nor he had very, let's say, much wealth belonging to him. In reality, the judge had been born to a family of a peasant caste, but his father saved up money to send him to the mission school. So, the reality of this judge, who was the grandfather of Sai, was that this judge belonged to a very, let's say, poor family. His father, let's say, saved a lot of money and then sent this judge to a mission school. He had studied hard and risen to the top of his class. He attended Cambridge, passed his exams, and was admitted to the Indian civil services. Now, friends, this judge was a very intelligent person. Throughout his schooling, he was a topper and he qualified Cambridge exam, and then he got a job as an Indian civil servant. He became a judge in India when he came back to India from Cambridge. He was placed in a district far from his home and toured around India, even though his knowledge of regional Indian languages was minimal. Now, friends, this judge was, let's say, a book rag kind of person. He do not have much knowledge about Indian culture, Indian lifestyle. But even then, he was transferred to various places in India and he served as a judge in various courts. When Sai turns 16, Noni realizes that she will need another tutor for math and science because her own knowledge has been exceeded. Now, friends, I told you that Noni is the tutor of Sai. Sai was growing up in the house of the judge. So when Sai turned to 16, her education became little tough, and Noni thought that now, let's say, her knowledge is not sufficient to teach Sai, and a new tutor is required to Noni. The judge asks the principal of the local college if he can recommend a teacher or graduate for her. Then the judge goes to, let's say, the nearby local college principal, because he was expecting a new tutor, an intelligent teacher who can teach his granddaughter Sai. 20 years old Gyan, a recent graduate who has not yet been able to find a job, is hired. He and Sai quickly become entranced by one another. Now, ultimately, Sai gets a new tutor. His name is Gyan, and then he was, let's say, expecting a job. He recently completed his graduation and he started teaching Sai. At the Queen of Tarts bakery, Biju meets a Muslim man from Zanzibar named Saeed. Now friends, we now again move back to the story of Biju. We know that now Biju is working in a bakery from where he is not, let's say, fired. So there he meets a Muslim person whose name is Saeed. He admires Saeed because of the way he seems to stay afloat in the underground system of being an illegal immigrant rather than drowning in it the way Biju feels. Now we see that Biju is inspired from Saeed, because Saeed is a person who is also an illegal immigrant, but police was not able to catch him. He was a very quick person. Biju begins to question his prejudice against people from Pakistan, and then questions his prejudice against people of many other ethnicities, as they had never done anything harmful to him or to India, unlike white people. Friends, Biju earlier was little biased towards people from Pakistan. He used to think that as I am an Indian and let's say Saeed is a Pakistani, so Saeed is his enemy. But when he met Saeed and when he became friendly with him, he came to know that the white people, the European people, they are more enemy to the Indians as compared to Pakistanis. And these, let's say, white people who are living in America or European countries, they are more dangerous, they are more harmful to the Indians as compared to Pakistanis. Back to Kalimpong, Sai asks the cook about the judge's wife. At first, the cook lies and says that they loved each other, but he then remembers that the judge hated his wife. Friends, now we are again moving back to the house of the judge. The place on which the house is located, that place is known as Kalimpong. Now that Kalimpong is a place which is near Darjeeling. Okay, so the entire setting of the locality of the judge, it is created there only. So here, as I told you that Sai is a, let's say, curious schoolgirl, and then she asks the cook about her grandfather and his relationship with the grandmother. But now here the cook initially lies about their healthy relationship, but then he remembers that they had a very bad relationship with each other. The judge hated his wife. Sai then questions the judge about her grandmother. He rebuffs her questions but begins to remember her for himself. So, cook do not want to answer the questions of Sai because she was just a kid. How will she understand the complexity between the relationship of judge and his wife? But he remembers everything what has happened in this house earlier. Before the judge has left for England, his family didn't have enough money for his travel expenses, and so they looked for a wife for him in order to gain a dowry. So friends, the reason behind the marriage of the judge when he was 20 years old and with a girl who was just 14 years old was dowry. As I told you earlier also, that the judge's father do not have enough money. So he wanted someone who can give money to their family, and with that money they can send their child to England for his studies. One local man named Boman Bhai Patel was extremely wealthy and was very interested in the judge because he planned to enter the ICS. So friends, there was a rich person whose name is Boman Bhai Patel. So he had a daughter and he wanted to make judge the bridegroom so that the life of his daughter can be, let's say, settled. Patel offered up his most beautiful daughter, who was 14 years old at the time. The two married shortly after, and she was renamed Nimi by the judge's family. So, the name of the girl before marriage was something else, but when she was married to the judge, the family of the judge gave her name as Nimi. The night of the wedding, he had tried to consummate the marriage, but she was terrified, and so they did not. So friends, as shortly after the marriage, judge had to leave to England because now he had got the money of the dowry. So he wanted to make a, let's say, relationship with his wife, but as the wife was just 14 years old, so she refused. She was afraid, and so they were not able to make that relation in the night, first wedding night. Before he left for England, the two shared one gentle moment in which he took her on an exhilarating bicycle ride. So friends, there is one, let's say, relationship which they had on one day. Judge took his wife on a bicycle ride before moving to England. The cook sends letters to Biju asking him to help others get to America. Now we are again moving back to the story of Cook and his son Biju. Cook wanted Biju to help other Indians also, whom he had sent to America. Biju feels overwhelmed by these requests, and Saeed empathizes with him because he is experiencing the exact same thing. So friends, Biju was, let's say, confused that how he is going to help other Indians whom his father had sent, because he himself was an illegal immigrant. In this confusing state, Saeed was there to understand him. Saeed was there to help him. More than anything, the two aim to get their green card. So, both of them, Biju and Saeed, both of them were putting efforts to get a green card and to settle down in America. One day, they are swindled by men in a van who say that they can get them green cards, but in reality, simply steal their money. Once a very, let's say, pathetic incident happens with these two. A group of men took them in their car, saying that they will help them in getting green card, and they stole all their money and thrown them out of their car. Shortly after this incident, the Queen of Tarts bakery closes. Now, unfortunately, these people took all the money of Biju, and suddenly after this incident, the Queen of Tart bakery also closes. So, Biju loses his job. Gyan and Sai's romance begins to bloom when he is stuck at the house due to monsoon. They flirt and play games, measuring each other's hands, feet, and limbs. Friends, I told you that Sai got a new tutor, a 20 years old boy whose name is Gyan. Now there is an intimate relationship which emerges between this teacher and the student on one day when he has to stay back to judge's house because of heavy rainfall. One day, Gyan asks her to kiss him, and she does. They begins to sightsee together, going to cultural institutions, the zoo and monastery. Now a relationship begins between the teacher and the student. They goes to, let's say, visit different cultural institutions. They go to visit zoo. They go to visit monastery. Basically, they wanted to spend lot of time with each other. Gyan tells her a little of his family history, about how they had been taken advantage of serving in the British Army. They had some discussions with each other. So Gyan, let's say, tells this girl, Sai, about his family background. He says that, let's say, his family members, they had served in the British Army. Meanwhile, Lola and Noni discusses the growing political rumblings of the Nepalis living in India, who are demanding the separate state, more job opportunities, and schools that teach Nepali. So friends, I told you that Noni was the, let's say, first tutor of this girl Sai, and Lola is her relative. So there is a discussion between Noni and Lola which is taking place in the story about the critical situation about the rights of Nepalis who are living in England. So that discussion happens about, let's say, teaching Nepali in the schools and giving more jobs to Nepalis. Noni is more understanding of their cause than Lola. But Lola begins to see her own prejudice when her neighbor, Mrs. Sen, starts speaking about Pakistanis with the same kind of bias. So, Noni was, friends, little understanding, but Lola, there is a, let's say, outrage which emerges into the mind of Lola when she hears Mrs. Sen speaking about Pakistanis with same kind of biasness. So, this Mrs. Sen, she was treating Pakistanis and Nepalis in the same manner. Biju now works at a restaurant called Brigates's, but is unhappy because they serve steak. Now friends, Biju again gets a job at a new place, but in this new place he is little unhappy, he is little dissatisfied because these people serve non-vegetarian items. He realizes that it is important to him to retain his values, and so he quits and goes to work in Gandhi Cafe, which is run by a man named Harish Hari. So finally Biju leaves Brigates and then he finds a new cafe, Gandhi Cafe, where let's say the owner of that cafe is a person with the name Harish Hari. Harish Hari invites the staff to live in the basement below the kitchen, but then pays them a quarter of minimum wage. So now here Biju got a facility of accommodation, but he is paid only a quarter of the minimum wage, let's say, in lieu of this stay. Sai celebrates Christmas with Lola, Noni, Uncle Potty and Father Booty. After New Year's, Gyan is in the market when he sees a procession of young men from the GNLF, Gorkha National Liberation Front. So, friends, the new year comes in the story. Sai celebrates the new year with Lola, Noni and the neighbors. And on the other hand, the Gyan is in the market at the time of New Year, and there he sees a procession of young men who are supporting the liberation or the separatism. He is quickly caught up in the procession and relates to their demands and complaints, which echo many of his own as a young Nepali man. Now friends, this person Gyan, he was, let's say, an originator of Nepali. He was a native of Nepal. So now this person, he feels associated with the demands which these GNLF people are putting in front of everyone. The next day, Gyan arrives at Choyo. Choyo, I told you that it is the name of the house of the judge. The next day, Gyan arrives at Choyo and yells at Sai, frustrated by her complicity in English cultural elitism. So, Gyan was little upset after the dilemma which is going on in his mind about the rights of Nepalis. So that frustration is released on Sai when he comes on the next day to her house to teach her, obviously. He was her tutor. And he feels frustrated on her, let's say, English cultural elitism. The judge remembers how his and Nimi's relationship had turned sour. When he had returned from England, he had taken his powder puff. Now, friends, now the story moves to the flashback of Judge. Judge remembers that, as I already told you, that the Cambridge experience was not very good for Judge. Nobody liked to talk to him. When he came back from Cambridge, he was very frustrated, and that frustration was, let's say, revealed on his wife. On one day, his wife, let's say, took the powder puff of the judge. As he looked for it, his family ridiculed him for using it. By the time he discovered that Nimi had taken it, he was furious and he raped her. So friends, it was a very simple incident of taking a powder puff. Nimmi did not want that his husband must consume this powder. This powder was related to, let's say, toxic items. It was intoxicated. So Nimmi did not want him to consume that. So she took it and, let's say, put it somewhere. But the judge, when came to know that his wife has done it, Nimmi has done it, he rapes her. In the following days, he insisted that she speak English and follow English customs, which she refused to do. Now, friends, there is another, let's say, reason of dispute between judge and his wife is that the wife did not like to follow the English customs and refused to behave in a, let's say, European, like a European, and judge expected his wife to behave like a European. He took off her bangles, threw away her hair oil, and pushed her face into the toilet. When he discovered her squatting on her, he then left her at their home while he went away on tour. So friends, there is one incident when, because judge did not like that his wife should, let's say, dress up like an Indian bride. So he, let's say, threw all her bangles and her hair oil, etc. and he pushed her face in the toilet. So he again, let's say, physically molested his wife. And then he left the house and went on a tour. The day after Gyan's eruption at Sai, he tries to apologize, but they only return to their fight about English customs, and Sai accuses him of being a hypocrite for enjoying Western things like cheese toast with her, but making fun of them with his friends. So now again story comes to the love affair of Sai and Gyan. I told you that Gyan was, let's say, frustrated, and then he quarreled with Sai on, let's say, her behavior of Western ways of living. But then Sai accuses him, saying that he is a hypocrite. He himself uses the Western ways of living, Western items to eat, and then how can he criticize the European culture? He leaves and tells his friends in the GNLF about the judge's guns, giving them a description of the Choyo and telling them that there is no telephone. Now, when Gyan, let's say, is humiliated when he was, let's say, abused by Sai. He goes to GNLF people and he gives this information to them that the judge's house has a lot of guns and there is no telephone on his house. The cook thinks about his attempt to send Biju abroad. For his first attempt, Biju had interviewed and been accepted at a cruise ship line. Now again a story comes to the cook. The cook goes in his flashback and he is thinking that when he thought of sending his son abroad, the son was interviewed and finally accepted. Finally, the son got a job at a cruise ship. They had paid 8,000 rupees for the processing fee and the cost of training before realizing that it was a scam. But friends, it was a scam. The son of the cook did not actually get a job, but they paid 8,000 rupees to someone who took that money and then he ran away. His second attempt involved applying for a tourist visa, despite the fact that it was difficult for poorer people to be approved for a visa. Biju was allowed to go to America. Then this person, this cook, he again made a second attempt to send his son to America. They applied for a visa, although they did not have sufficient money, but somehow, fortunately, Biju got this visa and then he went to America. At the Gandhi Cafe, 3 years after that visa was approved, Biju slips on rotten spinach. Now, that visa was approved, but 3 years after that, Biju slips on the rotten spinach in the restaurant cafe where he was working. He demands Harish Hari pay for a doctor for him, but Harish Hari refuses and calls Biju ungrateful. He suggests that Biju returns to India for medical care. Now, friends, when Biju is injured, he falls down on the ground. He demands some kind of, let's say, financial help or medical help, but Harish Hari refuses to do that. And then he asks Biju to go back to India for the medical care. Father Booty, Uncle Potty, Noni, Lola and Sai go to exchange their library books before the GNLF closes more roads and shops. Now again a story comes back to the house of Sai, where these people are exchanging books because they heard this news that GNLF, Gorkha National Liberation Front, it is going to close the roads and shops everywhere. When they start to walk back to their car, they spot a procession of GNLF and Sai sees Gyan there. When they start walking, when they took all these books and they were moving from their car to their house, this girl Sai, she finds Gyan in the group of these GNLF people. He ignores her. On the way back, Father Booty takes a picture of a butterfly at a checkpoint and is stopped by the police. It is discovered that he is in India illegally and he is quickly deported. Now finally, when they were moving back to their house, in the police checking, Sai came to know that Father Booty is also an illegal immigrant and he is sent back to his native place, some other country. The narration skips ahead after the incident in which the boys from the GNLF steals the judge's guns. A few days later, the police pick up a drunk and accuse him of the crime, beating him brutally. Now again, story comes back to the judge's house. There was a robbery of guns which happened in the house of judge. The police was investigating. They caught a person and accused that person beating that person brutally for the charge of robbery in judge's house. Meanwhile, in America, Biju becomes informed about the Nepalese strikes. He tries to call the cook and they have a very disjointed conversation. So, Biju, as I told you, that he was working with Harish Harry in America. He was informed about the Nepalese strike in India. So, he was concerned about his father. He called his father and they had a very, let's say, very unsympathetic conversation with each other. Biju feels even more empty than before. The strikes in Kalimpong continue and the Nepalis put up tents in front of Lola and Noni's property. So friends, this dispute of GNLF, it is continuously increasing in Kalimpong, and these people, these young boys, they put their tents in front of Lola and Noni's property. The sisters begin to feel that the wealth that always protected them now makes them vulnerable. So now these two, let's say, girls, these two sisters, Noni and Lola, these two sisters thought that now this property might be taken, might be, let's say, encroached by these boys who are supporting GNLF. Sai goes to find Gyan at his home and sees how poor he actually is. Gyan becomes angry at her pity and the two argue before he throws her in a bush and beats her. Now Sai was concerned about Gyan when she saw Gyan with the group of these GNLF, let's say, terrorists. She went to meet on his house, and there she saw that she is from a very rich family, but Sai is from this Gyan is from a very poor family. So Gyan, when looks at her, he starts beating her in his house. Sai returns home and sees the wife of the drunk who had been beaten by the police, begging the judge for money and mercy. They turn her away. Now there was one person who was drunk person who caught by police for charging a robbery in the house of the judge. So his wife was in a very critical condition and Sai feels mercy on her. Meanwhile, Gyan's sister informs his family of what he has been doing, and they forbid him from going to the GNLF protest the following day. So in this story, in the meanwhile, what happened, friends? That Gyan's sister informs the family that now Gyan is a part of GNLF. So the family restricted Gyan to do that. They rebuked him. The next day, the cook attends the protest because the GNLF is forcing each family to send a male representative. So, on the next day, what happened? The cook attended the protest because he was a male sent to the, let's say, GNLF support from the family of the judge. Rocks start flying from nowhere and the protesters and police in equal confusion begin to throw rocks at each other. Now suddenly in this protest, what happens? That there is a, let's say, fighting starts happening between the police and the protesters, and cook is in, let's say, between that fight. The police then begin to open fire on the crowd. Many young boys are killed and the protesters begin to wrestle weapons away from the police and turn on them. Now in this protest, it becomes very critical. There is a fire which opens from the side of the police, so the protesters became very angry. The police run away and seek shelter in private homes. Lola and Noni turn them away. So now the police runs from that place because the number of protesters was too much and the number of police was less. Biju decides to return home to India despite warnings not to. He buys various souvenirs to bring home to his father and takes the cheapest plane possible to Calcutta. Now, friends, I told you that Biju was an illegal immigrant and he was very upset on the behavior of Harish Hari. When Biju was injured, Harish Hari did not provide any medical support to him. So Biju wanted to go back to his father. He wanted to meet his father. So, feeling homesick, he booked a ticket to Calcutta and he left America. When he arrives, the airplane loses many bags and only compensates the foreigners and non-resident Indians. Now friends, Biju was a very unfortunate person. His bag, in which he had many gifts for his father, the bag was stolen. And the complaint of the stolen bags was booked only for the people who are foreigners and non-resident Indians, but not for Biju because he was an illegal immigrant and an Indian, native Indian. Biju waits for his luggage, which arrives intact, and steps out into the street. He feels at peace in his homeland. The incidents of horror continue in Kalimpong. There are many robberies and acts of arson. So friends, Biju finally gets his bag, and when he comes out, he feels relieved that now he can, let's say, feel the air of his own country. But the condition in the Kalimpong became very critical after that protest and the fire between police and stone pelting from the side of the protesters. The women that the judge had turned away returns and steals mut in order to sell her. Now, I told you that the husband of this woman was arrested for committing a robbery at the house of the judge. Now that woman comes to the judge's house and she steals the, let's say, favorite dog of judge, who is Mutt. Judge loved that dog so much. So she stolen that dog Mutt and then she sells her to get some money. When they realize she is missing, the judge, the cook and Sai all set out to search for her, because Mutt was a very loving creature in the judge's family. So they all searched Mutt. When the judge goes to the police station, he is mocked because this seems like a minimal crime relative to the atrocities being committed. Now when judge goes to the police station, filing a complaint of the stealing of his dog, the police feels very, let's say, very normal. They say that how can a dog, let's say, or a pet be so important for a family? The judge thinks back to the family, the culture and the wife he had abandoned. So the judge again, let's say, being frustrated living in India and between these, let's say, below mentality Indian people, he considered himself as better than the common Indians. He considered himself near to Europeans. One day, when he was on tour, the women had knocked on Nimi's door and taken her unknowingly to be a part of Nehru welcoming committee for the Indian National Congress Party. So, on one day, the judge was on tour. There was a woman, he came to Nimi's door and then she took Nimi to, let's say, to meet Nehru, who was there with the Indian National Congress Party meeting. The judge has returned and being confronted by the district commissioner, he lost a promotion and had been incredibly embarrassed. Now, friends, this story is going on in the flashback when the judge was young. So, here we see that there is a confrontation between judge and a district commissioner, due to which this judge loses his promotion. When he arrived home, he had cursed Nimi, beaten her and kicked her. 6 months later, his daughter had been born. So, he now, let's say, pours all his frustration on Nimi. He beats her because she was his wife. After 6 months of this physical molestation, Nimmi gives birth to a daughter in that house. He never met her. It is then implied that Nimmi's brother in law had orchestrated her death when her sleeve had caught fire on the stove. So, after that daughter was born, Nimmi was taken back to her parental house because Judge did not want to meet her. So, there Nimmi was burnt alive when she caught fire while cooking on the stove. Biju is told that there are no buses to Kalimpong because of the political situation. Now Biju is out of the airport. Now he want to go back to Kalimpong, his native place. He want to meet his father, but no buses are available because in Kalimpong there was a curfew. The situation was very critical. Biju catches a ride with some GNLF men. They take him most of the way before dropping him off and robbing him of all of his possessions, money and clothing. Now friends, again a mishappening happens with Biju. Biju takes a lift from the boys of GNLF and they rob him and take all the money from him which he has earned while working for 2-3 years in America. He is forced to walk the rest of the way to Kalimpong. The judge grows more and more distraught over Mutt's disappearance. Now, Biju had no other choice. Everything was taken from him by these boys. Now he walked towards Kalimpong. On the other hand, in the judge's house, all people are upset because they were remembering Mutt, their dog. He blames the cook and threatens to kill him. The cook then goes to the canteen where he runs into Gyan. Hearing what has happened and growing increasingly guilty, Gyan resolves to find Mutt for Sai. Now, the judge was angry with his cook. He said that cook did not pay attention to, let's say, protecting the dog, and which is why it was stolen. Cook goes to Gyan and Gyan brings back that dog from the GNLF people. The cook returns to Choyo and begs the judge to beat him. The judge hits him over and over again with a slipper. Now we see that the judge is a habituate person of physical abuse. So he again beats his cook. Sai yells on him to stop and makes the cook tea. Now Sai, she was, as you know, she was a schoolgirl and she was very sympathetic towards cook. She sees all these things, but she was not able to do anything. After some time, she makes a tea for the cook. At that moment, the gate rattles and the cook goes to answer it. It is Biju. The cook and his son leap at each other at morning breaks over the mountains. Now, the cook was very upset. He was beaten by his master. Suddenly, the doorbell is rang and Biju was there on the door. The cook and his son leaps at each other. They, let's say, hugs each other and the morning breaks over the mountain. So it was the night time and now in the dawn, the cook and the son, the father and the, let's say, father and son, cook and Biju, they meet each other. They, let's say, they complete each other's incomplete life. So friends, with this, we saw that the complete story has many plots and many characters. But basically we see that in the story there is a clash between European ways of living, European culture, European way of thinking and Indian mentality, Indian way of living. It is just because of this cultural clash. Judge has a very bad relationship with his wife. Sai's relationship with Gyan is also reaches to a very critical position. The cook sends his son for his better future, but the son gets nothing and he comes back to India. So, in this way, we can understand that the situation is, let's say, revolves around the cultural clashes and the problem of immigration, and for the bright future people goes abroad, but in abroad their complete lifestyle, their way of thinking changes, and rather than getting, let's say, a better future, they get something worse. They get something complex in their personality, and in the complexity of their personality, they ruin their life. In this story, in this plot, friends, we concluded that the judge has ruined his life. Gyan has ruined his life. Biju has also ruined his life. Biju's father wanted him to become successful and earn money. But ultimately, Biju, when reaches back to his father, he has no money. Gyan wanted a job because he completed his graduation, but he was thrown out of that job because the relationship between Sai and Gyan changed from a teacher-student relationship to a lover-beloved relationship. So ultimately, he lost the job and he joined the group of those revolutionists. On the third hand, we saw that the judge, his wife died, and now he is alone in his life. The judge loved most in this entire world his dog Mutt. But even that Mutt is taken away from the life of the judge, and now the judge is completely alone. And maybe after, let's say, some years, he will die in isolation and, let's say, in frustration. So all these things, when clubbed together, make us understand that rather than going abroad, or rather than educating ourselves, or rather than, let's say, associating all these factors with the success or happiness, it is more important to think and introspect. What are we? What is our personality? And how we are going to achieve that inheritance of loss, which is, let's say, which is there in our personality. And if that inheritance, that inheritness of loss can be removed from the positivity and happiness, only then we will be satisfied in our life. With this note, I end my lecture, and I hope that you have understood the brief outline, the structure of this novel, The Inheritance of Loss. That is all for today. Thank you so much.